All right, let's talk about money. We all think we know the story, right? It's one of the first things you learn in economics. A simple, logical story about how we went from trading chickens to using coins. But what if I told you that entire story is basically a fairy tale?
You've heard it a million times. Way back when, we were all just trading things directly. If you're a baker and you need new shoes, you've got to find a shoemaker who just happens to be in the mood for some bread.
And this system, barter, it was a total pain. Economists have a fancy term for it, the double coincidence of wants. It just means both people have to want exactly what the other person has. So what if the shoemaker isn't hungry? What if he wants a new pot? Now you, the baker, have to go track down a potter who wants bread, trade for the pot, and then go back to the shoemaker. It sounds exhausting, frankly. So according to the story, humanity had this brilliant idea. Let's invent money. We'll use these shiny, durable bits of metal that everyone agrees are valuable. Suddenly, trade is easy, efficient, and boom, civilization is on its way. It's a nice, clean story.
Yeah, but what if it's just not true? What if archaeologists and anthropologists have looked for this so-called age of barter and have found pretty much nothing, but they have found tons of evidence for something else, something much, much older?
And that something is credit. You see, the real story is that for most of human history, our economies ran on debt. The first money wasn't a thing you could hold in your hand at all. It was a promise, an IOU. It was a record of who owed what to whom. And just look at the timeline here. It's staggering. We found tally sticks, basically bones with notches carved in them to track debts that are 35,000 years old. Fast forward to ancient Sumer, 5,000 years ago, and you find these super complex credit systems all recorded on clay tablets. And the first coins? They don't even show up until around 600 BC. That's a gap of over 30,000 years, where economies were running just fine on credit, not cash.
The late great anthropologist David Graeber really turned this idea on its head. He pointed out that in small communities, you wouldn't barter with your neighbor Jane. If Jane needed bread, you'd just give it to her. You both just knew she'd return the favor later. It was all based on these informal, community-wide IOUs. So this begs a huge question. If money wasn't invented to replace barter, then why was it invented?
Well, if credit and IOUs worked perfectly well with people you knew and trusted, that gives us a clue. Maybe money wasn't for dealing with your neighbors. Maybe it was for dealing with strangers.
So the old myth says money solves a logistics problem, getting the right goods to the right people. But a much more compelling theory says it solves a social problem, the problem of trust. Think about it. When you're trading with some guy you've never met from a different land who speaks a different language, you can't exactly run a tab with him. You need something tangible, something you both agree has value on the spot. And we see this pop up all over the archaeological record. For centuries in North America, shell beads from the Pacific coast were used as currency to trade thousands of miles inland between totally different groups. Same thing in Bronze Age Europe with these standardized bronze ingots that connected everyone from Scandinavia to the Mediterranean. These items weren't just decorative. They were a technology that made trust possible between strangers. Okay, so money is for debt, and it's for trading with strangers. But even that isn't the whole story, because sometimes exchanging valuable things isn't about economics at all. Sometimes it's about social status, prestige, and building relationships. This brings us to the idea of a gift economy. And the classic example of this is the kula ring in Papua New Guinea. For generations, men would undertake these incredibly dangerous canoe voyages across open seas, not to get stuff, but to give away prized possessions, beautiful shell necklaces and armbands. Why on earth would they do that? Because the goal wasn't to make a profit, it was to gain prestige. It was a power move. And what's fascinating is that they had a completely separate system for simple barter, which they called gimwali. You can see the difference right here. Gimwali was for everyday stuff like food or tools. It was a one-and-done deal. But the kula exchange was all about status. Giving away these famous, valuable shells created lifelong alliances and made you a legend. It just goes to show you that exchange can be about a lot more than just getting stuff. So we have all these different ideas floating around. Debt, trade with strangers, social status. Is there a way to see how they all fit together? Well, let's look at the 5,000-year history of a single currency, the shekel. The story of the shekel is like a mini history of money itself. It starts out around 3000 BC in Mesopotamia as just a unit of weight for barley, a real thing. Then it morphs into a standardized weight of silver, perfect for long-distance trade with strangers.
Later on, it becomes an actual stamped coin, the Tyrian shekel, which was the only currency accepted for paying the Jewish temple tax. That's a kind of state-enforced debt. And today, of course, the shekel is the national currency of Israel, a powerful symbol of identity. It's been all of these things: a commodity, a tool for trade, a record of debt, and a cultural symbol. So if that neat little story about barter we learned as kids is wrong, what's the real story? When you boil it all down, what even is money?
Well, the biggest takeaway is this. Money is not actually a thing. It's not the coin, it's not the paper, it's not the number in your bank account.
It's a social technology. It's an idea. It is a shared story that we all collectively agree to believe in. Its value comes entirely from our trust in the system, this massive, invisible web of credits and debts, of obligations to one another. Whether the token is a notched bone, a shell, a piece of silver, or a bit of data on a server, it's just a marker we use to keep track of that story.
And that brings us right up to today, because our money is changing again, right? It's becoming purely digital, sometimes even decentralized with things like cryptocurrencies. And that forces us to ask a really big question. After thousands of years of evolving the story about value, trust, and obligation, what's the next chapter going to be? What new story are we about to write?